Ever wondered how to set up frame rates so that when you are developing for a particular platform, you know what frames that you're trying to target? Now, in Unity, most of the time, your default project will come up with some very default settings, and that means having your frames uncapped. What it can do is when you don't have a limit on your frames per second, especially when it comes to physics interactions, you'll find that some of your physics interacts as you expected, but then what happens is as the frame rate drops, say people that are running your game with a lower refresh rate than your monitor that you've been testing on, you will realize that some of the physics interactions don't behave because the fixed update loop is different from the update loop, and the time between those starts to drop a little bit the lower your refresh rate is. So we're going to have a look how we can set up a frame cap that is very easy to change and hopefully get you developing a little bit better and trying to target the specific frame rate that is appropriate for your game. So we have a scene over here. It is running with an uncapped frame rate. Here we are, we just have 350 frames per second. Probably something to notice. I'm not sure how many of you have this in mind, but when you are split screening your view, there are resources being cut away from this. So if we were to full screen our game view, we actually get a lot more frames. However, your graphics card is probably going to be going on fire. So let's find out how we can cap this. Over here, I have created a frame rate limiter. And what this does, it sets a target frame rate and it sets the vsync count. I'll get into in just a moment what that is, but let me just demonstrate that when we hit play, we are able to get the frame rate to exactly what we had set, more or less. So you can see we're capped within the split view and it runs even better and closer to the cap in our full screen view. Of course, this will be even smoother in the built version of your game. So let's find out how do we actually make this. We have over here the frame rate limiter, and it's very simple. It takes nothing. It's the target frame rate that you set and a vsync count. Now, what actually happens over here is that we're running application.target frame rate and we're setting it there. And we're setting up the quality settings vsync count up over here to whatever value we have there. Now, importantly, these are integers, not floats. So in case you get an error, you probably need to make it an integer, not a float. So if you do something like that, it's going to error out. So what actually is the vsync count? Because there is a relationship between the frame rate and vsync count. When the vsync count is 0, the frame rate target overrides the vertical synchronization of the display. So it will always try to render to that target frame rate. Now, obviously, this is just a very simplified approach. We're not talking about using techniques in reaching that frame rate, such as scaling your render resolution and that kind of thing. We're just talking about getting your frame rate capped. So at 0, it uses the target frame rate. The vsync count has got 4 values, or rather 5 values. It's got 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. What this means is how many frames are in between the actual render frames. And what this actually means, actually, I just put in a little notepad just so that you can get a better idea. At the target frame rate at -1, so -1 of the target frame rate sets to unlimited. A 0 on vsync count uses the target frame rate, so this will actually be used. If vsync count is anything except 0, the target frame rate does not come into effect. It pretty much goes off your display. So vsync count at 1, it uses the display refresh rate. If you're running a 120 Hz monitor, it will run at 120 Hz, provided that your quality of your assets and your lighting and your rendering can actually render up to, or allow the machine to render up to 120 Hz. So it is the cap. It doesn't mean it will render there. It just means that it depends on how you build your game. It will reach that cap and nothing more. Then we've got vsync 2, 3, and 4, and that is just a half or a third or a quarter of the actual display. I've just put it very simply. You can have a look at this if you don't want to watch the rest of this. If the display is at 60, I'll render at half of it, so that is 2. At 3, if your display refresh rate is 60, it'll do a third, and once again a quarter, and that is what they represent. Importantly, over here, the most prominent values are 0 and 1, which is used at target frame rate, or sync with the display rate. Now, target frame rate being -1 is unlimited. So if you want to return our cap back to unlimited, we're going to go -1. We're going to hit play. And remember how we were running at 120 Hz. As soon as this hits the awake, when you're playing your application, then it will be unlimited. And that's all there is to it. It is nice and simple. I do recommend to have a look at the Unity documentation. They do give some very good recommendations as to what display frame rates you should be targeting and some hints for different platforms. Now, remember how the vsync count is checking on the quality settings. Another place you can have a look at this is Edit, Project Settings, and within Project Settings there is Quality. On Quality, you will see vsync count. Now you can add different quality levels for your different platforms over here and your vsync count, and these are what's available. So that's all there is to it. If you haven't subscribed yet and you're watching this content, please do. It supports me and it helps us build this channel, and in doing so, build better content. Thanks for watching.